Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us again. We're happy to be back with you for a live program. I'm Andrew Dalton, the director of the Adams County Historical Society. I'm here with Tim Smith, our historian. Tonight's program is going to be about a famous structure in the town of Gettysburg that many of you are probably familiar with, the Fahnestock Store. It has an amazing early history as well as its role during the Battle of Gettysburg, which is more well known. And we're going to go through that whole story and show you some incredible photographs from our collection here that have to do with this building. Whoop, we need to get rid of that sound real quick. Sorry, we're always still ironing out glitches in our system even after all this time. But thank you for joining us. If you can hear us all right, if you could let us know, we'll just check and make sure everything sounds all right before we keep going. Oh, there's even more. Just let us know if you can hear us and everything's all right, and we'll get going with the program. It looks like everything is good from what I'm hearing, so I'll kick things off to Tim in a minute. First, I also want to thank the Dobbin House Tavern for sponsoring all of our programs this year. We're happy to have friends at the Dobbin House who are so generous toward the Historical Society. And if you're not familiar with ACHS, we've been around since the 1880s. We have a collection of millions of historic items here in Gettysburg that pertain to all eras of our local history and also some really important nationally significant artifacts that have to do with Gettysburg, the battle, Lincoln's visit, and President and Mamie Eisenhower. So it's an incredible collection that needs your help to preserve, to keep up with all this preservation. We have to get out of this current facility that we're in right now, the Wolf House, which is an old Victorian structure, and we're actually building a new facility that will be properly climate controlled and fire protected, and it'll allow us to open a museum where we can display some of our really incredible artifacts that have never been seen before. So I want to just show you one example of what we're doing with this project. This is, I'm sure some of you have seen it, but this is the rendering of our new building. It's going to start later this year. The construction, actually the site work has already started. But this is a rendering showing a two-story museum building that we're working on. It'll have a 5,000 square foot exhibit space. Then upstairs we'll have an event center for all kinds of programs just like this one that we eventually will be doing again in person. And we'll have a large research archive as well so that you can come in and look through some of our materials and maybe make some of your own discoveries. So we're excited about this project. I hope you'll hit the donate button tonight if you are interested in supporting what we're doing. And we're always looking for new members and supporters. And if you're watching this on Facebook, if you don't mind liking it and sharing it, we'd appreciate that support as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you'd hit the subscribe button, we'd sure appreciate that so that you'll continue to see our videos. This is part of our weekly series. We've been doing a video every week since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic last year. And we're going to start in-person programs again real soon. You can actually check out our website for the first few programs we've put up. And during the battle anniversary this year, from June 26th to July 1st, we're going to be doing live videos and recorded videos all around Gettysburg with a series that we've put together called Caught in the Crossfire. That's about the civilians and their experiences during the battle. Of course, we have hundreds of accounts here left by local residents, letters and diaries and newspaper articles that really give you a different perspective on Gettysburg. So we're going to be taking you to some places you've probably never seen before, in attics, in basements, in cupolas. We were just on top of a roof today, actually the roof of the Faunestock house, and we'll have footage of that premiering over the anniversary. But it's a wonderful series. You can watch it on our Facebook page or on YouTube. You don't have to have a Facebook account or a YouTube account. You can watch just with any computer or any device. So I hope you'll do that, and thanks again for joining us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim, who's going to go through the history of the Faunestock building in Gettysburg. So thanks again.
Okay. So the Faunestock building is probably one of the more famous buildings in the town at the time of the battle. And the Faunestock Store, located at the corner of Baltimore and Middle Street, is probably one of the more successful business enterprises in Gettysburg at the time of the Civil War. The building itself was probably constructed about 1810. It was certainly there by 1812, as it appears, with a large increase in the tax records at that time. For many years, the building was used as a hotel or a tavern. As a matter of fact, there are advertisements for it as the Spread Eagle Tavern. And you might know that there's this famous illustration of Baltimore Street. The original painting is in the Henry Ford Museum in Michigan. And it's the first and second block of Baltimore Street, the west side of the street, and prominently featured in the center of it, let's go to the next one, is the Spread Eagle Hotel. There's actually a later, somebody put a caption on this, I guess William Tipton, when he recorded an image of it and said it was from 1833. It seems to me it might be from just a few years earlier than that, maybe in the late 1820s or maybe 1830, because of some of the signs on the businesses around it. But let's go to the next one. In 1833, the tavern was purchased by Samuel Fahnestock. He was a businessman from York Springs, and he had actually moved to Gettysburg, opened up a business here in 1831, and in 1833 purchased the tavern and then opened his store at that location. And advertisements in the newspaper start about that time. These images here are off of an ancestry website, ancestry.com, and they are members, Samuel and his wife, from a genealogy made from members of their family. In 1833, we have advertisements for Samuel Fahnestock Store, and here you can see one of his advertisements, and it describes where the store is located and a little bit about what they sell at the store. It starts off as sort of a dry goods store. Let's go to the next one. Now, through the early years, he was in and out of business with his brother-in-law, Isaac Balker. So his wife, Susan Balker, her grandfather was one of the early Lutheran ministers and pioneers in York County. And her brother, Isaac, co-owned the property with Samuel for a time. And both Samuel Fahnestock and Isaac were very instrumental as trustees of Pennsylvania College, or what would later become Gettysburg College, and their children received their education at Gettysburg College. Now, it started off as Samuel Fahnestock Store, and then eventually it became Faunestock and Sons. And here you can see an advertisement from 1852 for Samuel Fahnestock and two of his sons, James Fahnestock and Henry Fahnestock. And later, a third son would be part of Fahnestock and Sons, and that would be Edward Fahnestock. In 1855, Samuel retired, and his sons took over the business, and then it was known as the Fahnestock Brothers Store. Here is an image of James Fahnestock, who actually, at the time of the Civil War, lived on Baltimore Street in the house directly across from the Faunestock store. Here are images that I actually received here at the Historical Society. One day, a Faunestock descendant came into the society and announced that he had photographs of James and his son Gates Fahnestock and the parents Samuel Fahnestock and Susan Balker Fahnestock. So he allowed me to make copies of them for our collection. And so these are about 61 images of Samuel and his wife. I noticed on Ancestry.com, people are actually sharing the photograph here of Susan Fahnestock as Samuel's mother, who actually died in 1860. So a little bit of confusion as to who it might be among different members of the family. But I think that's kind of common with older photographs and handed down through families. But that's definitely Samuel Fahnestock there on the left. And Samuel died in 1861, and he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery. But Susan Balker Fahnestock continued to live at the Fahnestock building up until her death in 1877, I believe. Let's go to the next one. Now, Susan had a few brothers. Isaac, I mentioned, was a business partner for a time with her husband. And another of her brothers, her younger brother, was Henry Balker, who actually would become the president of Pennsylvania College and was president at the time of the battle. Here's an illustration of him as a young man and a photograph from, I believe, 1862. Let's go to the next one. Oh, go back one. Can we go back one?
Sure.
I wanted to mention that one of the interesting stories we have from the 1932 history of Gettysburg College is that the Heffelbauer history.
That's right.
Actually tells a story that Susan and Henry's brother Isaac lived in Maryland at the time of the battle, and he had two sons that served in the army during the war. One of them, Oscar Balker, actually served in the Confederate Army, and one of his sons, Charles Henry Balker, was actually a captain in the Potomac Home Brigade Infantry, and both of them were at the Battle of Gettysburg, and according to the college history, both of them visited their aunt at the Faunestock house during the fighting at different times. Pretty neat story. This is an illustration from the 1858 Adams County wall map, and it's a very interesting illustration for a number of reasons, but it shows the Fahnestock Brothers Store shortly before the outbreak of the Civil War. And again, I mentioned it's one of the more prominent business operations in the town. And one of the interesting features of the building is the observatory that was on the back rear of the building along the Middle Street side. According to Daniel Skelly, who was a clerk at the store at the time of the battle, the observatory, quote, was on the back of the building fronting West Middle Street. There were steps from the third-story floor up through the roof of the building, the exit being through a large trap door. The observatory had railings and benches around it, and it was about 8 feet or more square. So, of course, that's from Daniel Skelly in his account we're going to talk about, written in 1932. But you can see in the illustration, which had to have been done about 1857, you can see the observatory. And I think the building was upgraded when the Fahnestock brothers took over from their father about 1855. And I have no direct evidence for when the observatory is placed on the building, but I'm thinking about 1855. Now, let's go to the next image. And here are two photographs where I've blown them up and attempted to enhance them slightly. The one on the left, the top left, that is actually an 1863 image, a July 1863 image, showing that the observatory is there in the same place it is on the drawing. And the larger image on the right is actually owned by the Adams County Historical Society, and it's an original image from, I believe, 1886, maybe 1888 at the latest, and you can see that the observatory is still there, and you can kind of see the fenced-in area and possibly the bench and the railing behind it on the side of the building. So for those who have heard of the observatory but not really seen it in images, I thought that would be kind of interesting to check it out. Now, of course, there are photographs of the Faunestock building taken after the battle by Alexander Gardner. There are two. And both of these images are mentioned in William Frassinito's books. And of course, in early photography at Gettysburg, he highlights this image and he discusses the image. And it's a very good analysis of the building. In this image, you can actually see the United States Sanitary Commission sign. I think if we go to the close-up, I should mention that it's believed that that is a plate view that was made from one half of a stereo, and its stereo negative is, in fact, at the Library of Congress.
Wow.
So let's go to the close-up now. And one more, we'll blow it up. You can kind of see the United States Sanitary Commission sign. The Sanitary Commission moved into that building. We have a specific account on July 8th. And William Fahnestock has kind of determined that this photograph must be taken about July 9th. I guess it's possible it's taken a little bit earlier or later, but he gives a very compelling argument in his book for the date of July 9th. So we have a really good date. Now, in his book, he mentioned that there's another image of the Faunestock building, and we have had several conversations about it at the time of the publication of his early photography at Gettysburg. The New York Public Library digitized their photograph collection many years ago. I don't even know exactly when they did it. But as part of the project that I was on with the museum at the Gettysburg National Military Park with the Gettysburg Foundation, and I worked for a company named History Associates, which was acquiring the photographs. I spent a lot of time in different photographic archives, and I became aware that the New York Public Library had digitized their photographs, and I looked through them and found this other image available in their archives. Let's go to the next image.
Great discovery. Yeah. Just for those not familiar with the Sanitary Commission, what was their role in
Well, the United
Gettysburg
States
after
Sanitary Commission is one of the charitable organizations that brings goods and supplies into the areas after the fighting, or large cities where wounded soldiers are gathered to try to help the Army care for not just the wounded, but the sick, from the large amount of men that are in the military at that time.
Is that what we're looking at too here in these
and you can
photographs?
see the boxes out front of the building.
Sure.
For the United States Sanitary Commission that were brought in after the railroad was reestablished into the town, and then of course they put the goods and supplies on the boxes and boxes onto wagons, and they send them out to the various campsites where there were hospitals.
Right. It's a rare look at how busy things were too. You can see
Yeah,
the people
and
moving
you can see
around.
it's extremely busy.
Exposure time is
Let's
longer.
go to the image from the New York Public Library now.
There it is.
And this is it. Now, there are several images in the collection at the New York Public Library, and I noticed right away. Now, in this case, I had the advantage of having seen a version of this image from William Fahnestock, who had got a version of the image from another historian that had alerted him to the fact that the second image was available. But this one was part of a series of prints, and these prints were made off of the original Alexander Gardner negatives. Now, the story, as I understand it, was that these glass plate negatives were slightly cropped in 1865 when E and H.T. Anthony were creating this stereo series. And so they took the original negatives and they cropped a little bit around them to make them usable for their process of printing the stereos. And the ones from this collection at the New York Public Library are prints made off of the negatives prior to them being cropped. And I brought this to the attention of the Center for Civil War Photography, Gary Edelman, John Richter, Bob Zeller was the president. Of course, he's still the president. And they absolutely loved this. And Bob Zeller did a whole article about this. Now, when I say this, to us, this is exciting because you can see much more off to the left of this view than you can in the versions of it that are prints that were made after the negatives were cropped.
I think we have a close-up.
And so here's a close-up. And in this particular one, we can see the brick sidewalk along West Middle Street, East Middle Street. We're on East Middle Street looking across Baltimore Street down West Middle Street. We can actually see the buildings along the north side of West Middle Street, some of which we did not have Civil War photographs or period photographs of any type prior to this, including the Harvey Waddell's home down the street, which is very interesting.
And Whistle Attorney Office today.
Oh,
yep,
yeah.
Still there. Yep.
And
it's the one very like cottage-like with the big peaked roof. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar.
I think he calls it in the ad in the paper where it's built a Bavarian cottage type building. And on the left you can actually see one of the gas street lamps.
Wow.
And of course you can see a wagon that is hauling supplies away from the Sanitary Commission. And I believe off the top of my head I'm too far away to see, but it's something like 2nd Division, 6th Army Corps. It says something like that on it. And you can also see the macadamized Baltimore pike, meaning the crushed stone that was laid down on top of the pike. Now, and I should mention that it was Andrew that actually obtained a really clear copy of this from the New York Public Library at the time when he was a student.
That's right.
He had asked him for
using my age to get the free high resolution.
If we can get a nice copy of it. So there were other ones there at that time. And I'm always amazed at this, that we're still learning about these photographs. It just took, I guess, with the New York Public Library's views, other people had got on their site and other people had seen this photograph, but I don't think before me, no one else realized that these prints were made from a larger negative than the one that exists at the Library of Congress. Wow. So having a little bit of knowledge about the topic and then discovering these new images really helps.
I should point out, too, our good friends Gary Edelman and Brian Kennel are watching and enjoying the program.
So I'm sure Gary probably knows, a little more about the story of the crop negatives. I hope I explained it somewhat all right.
That's I'm sure he'll let us know.
That's not my forte.
Yes, and I should point out, too, the gas lamp, I just wanted to say, we have 2 of those original gas lamps in our collection that we're going to be putting on display in our new museum. So you'll have to visit us and see those.
Yeah, and gas came to Gettysburg in 1861. So it's a relatively new item in the town to have gas street lamps.
And the courthouse was relatively new as well. It's not in this view, but just to the left, the courthouse built in 1859 is not visible, but it would have been a pretty big change to that part of the town just before this was taken.
I should also mention that, of course, the same New York Public Library, they digitized the Elliott burial map that, and we discovered that in their collection. And one of the reasons I discovered it in that collection was because I had known that they had digitized their collection and that you could get on it on their website, and then there were places on their website where you could search for items within their collection.
Right.
And that really helps. Of course, this building we're talking about, the Fahnestock building, became famous because of an event that occurred there on the morning of July 1st, 1863. And Daniel Alexander Skelly, a boy of 18 at the time, of course, wrote this book in 1932, A Boy's Experience During the Battle of Gettysburg, and he, in detail, describes the events surrounding the morning of July 1st and the building. And in it, I should mention in his book, early in the morning, he goes out to Seminary Ridge, west of the town, and he watches as the Confederate Army advances, and Buford's cavalry begins to fire rounds at the advancing Southerners.
Right.
And he actually describes
a close call, right?
Yeah, he climbs up a tree not far from the railroad cut. I always like to imagine it's the tree on the right of this Gutekunst view taken after the battle, showing the Seminary Ridge railroad cut. He climbs up in the tree, he's looking out, and all of a sudden the Confederate artillery is placed around her tavern on Hers Ridge and begins to lob shells in the direction of Seminary Ridge, and a couple shells land too close for comfort. And he and his friends, he climbs down the tree, then he run back into the town. on his way back into town, he says he passes General John Reynolds on his way out to the seminary to meet General John Buford, which I think is a fascinating part of his account.
Sure.
But he makes his way back into town, and he climbs up, goes through the Fahnestock building, and then goes up to the stairs to the observatory.
And what was his role there at the time of the battle?
He is a clerk working at the Fahnestock Brothers Store.
Right.
Now, he says that when he gets to the observatory, he is with his friends Gus Bentley, Isaac Johns, and Mrs. Louisa Fahnestock, Louisa Tate Fahnestock, who is the wife of Edward G. Fahnestock. And here from my personal collection, now the Tim Smith collection at the Adams County Historical Society, a picture I got years ago of Louisa Tate Fahnestock, wife of Edward G. Fahnestock, and their two children on the right. And I believe on the right that's from like an 1865, late 1865, early 1866 Levi Mumper image. And that is actually standing there is Halleck Page Fahnestock, and he is named after General Halleck.
Wow.
He's born in 1861. And I find that interesting.
It's an obscure
we
general
talk
to
about,
name your
you know,
child
kids
after.
named after General Grant, or even kids named after General Meade, but how about a kid named after Henry Halleck? And then his brother, Ed Fahnestock, is in the dress there, sitting on top of the little table that appears in many of the Levi Mumper images.
Wow.
And so this, like I said, I think it's an 1865, 1866.
Did you find these in antique shops?
Images. Yeah, both of these I discovered in local antique shops.
Wow.
You know, just perusing the area. Mrs. Louisa, let me just mention before we talk about that Louisa Fahnestock's husband, Edward G. Fahnestock, one of the Fahnestock brothers, he was in Company E, 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry at the outbreak of the war, and then he became the lieutenant colonel of the 165th Pennsylvania drafted militia. And at the time of the battle, he's in Suffolk, Virginia. And after he's discharged from that unit, he'd actually would become a paymaster in somewhere in the Western Army. I'm not exactly sure where he is. As a matter of fact, on one of the records it mentions when he's a paymaster for the U.S. Army in the Western Theater, he takes John Skelly with him as his personal servant, Daniel Skelly's younger brother. Just useless trivia there. Now, of course, the building is famous because of the association with General Oliver Otis Howard on July 1st, 1863. And we are fortunate that we have 3 different people that left accounts of what happened on the building that day. Daniel Alexander Skelly, who wrote about it in 1932. He was also interviewed about it earlier on, and there's an interview about it with him in the history of the 153rd Pennsylvania prior to that. And then we have 3 different times where General Oliver Otis Howard mentions visiting the Faunestock building on July 1st. And then we have an account, I think this is the next thing, an account from the National Tribune that I discovered. Now, again, it is interesting about this. This account was published in 1885 in the National Tribune. This account has been in that paper since that date, and it's available microfilm. And, you know, I used to go up to Carlisle and look at this newspaper. There's an index of it. Richard Sowers has a nice index of it. Other people have seen this account, no doubt. But no one has used this account in context with the Battle of Gettysburg or General Howard's visit. I actually got this account off of newspapers.com. As a matter of fact, we were just talking about, Andrew was mentioning that we have a few hundred accounts by Gettysburg civilians about their experiences during the battle. And the thing I like to do in recent years, since newspapers.com has come along, is look for accounts of the Battle of Gettysburg, not in the local newspaper, but in Nebraska newspapers, in California newspapers, in Michigan and Wisconsin newspapers, looking in places where Gettysburg civilians moved to later in life. And I have found dozens and dozens of accounts of Gettysburg civilians that have never been used in any book written on the battle.
Right. I think we just found one last week, right?
Yeah, we just found one last week. Yeah. This account is about the Fahnestock building, and it's by a guy named William Augustus Bentley. Now, on the account it says W.A. Bentley, and it didn't take too long before I figured out that William Augustus Bentley is Gus Bentley that's mentioned in Dan Skelly's account. As a matter of fact, the similarities between this 1885 account and the 1932 account written by Daniel Skelly illustrates to me that Daniel Skelly has this account in his hand when he's writing his account, because the things are in the same exact order of occurrence, and the facts are pretty much the same, although they differ in minor details. But where Daniel Skelly's account of General Howard being at the Faunestock building is used over and over and over again, no book has cited William Augustus Bentley's account of the Faunestock Observatory. So again, I thought with this program, I would like to highlight his account.
Has this ever
and
been
talk
seen
about
before,
it.
really, outside of our files here?
Well, I mean, it's in the newspaper, in the National
Right.
Tribune.
That's true, yes.
So maybe it has been used before.
Right, right.
But it's fascinating. So William Augustus Bentley, his father is Eli Bentley, who was a carriage maker in the town, I believe, worked in the carriage industry. And he's 17 years old at the time. And according to that account that we just showed you, it said that later in the war, he's in the Signal Corps. And of course, from a 1913 article in a local newspaper, Augustus Bentley of Princeton, Kentucky, he moved to Kentucky early on after the battle, returned to Gettysburg. Oh, I have 19 years old there. It's interesting because in his personal account, he says he's 17, and then I find later that the date of birth indicates he's 19. Do you ever wonder about that? Do Civil War personalities know how old they are? Have they kept track of their date of birth as carefully as we keep track of ours?
Maybe
I always wonder about that.
How old they were at a certain point in time.
Just forget how old they are.
Right.
But he's buried in Kentucky. You see, he died in 1927. But the bottom account says that he was in town in 1913 visiting the scenes of his boyhood.
Wow.
And it actually mentions that in 1864 he enlisted in the Signal Corps, and it gives some other guys in town he was in the Signal Corps with. So it's definitely his account. So we have three accounts, or three different people write about what happens at the Fahnestock Observatory on July 1st. And of course, again, Daniel Alexander Skelly, General Oliver Otis Howard, and Gus Bentley. There possibly are other accounts. I have a mention in some notes that I believe Charles Howard, who's on the staff of his brother, General Oliver Otis Howard, has something about the Fahnestock Observatory in one of his accounts, but I haven't been able to locate it. I haven't seen that anytime recently. I made a note. Probably something I saw in the Park Files a while back. Now, the story basically is that on the morning of July 1st, the fighting begins. General Howard is out on the battlefield here west of the town. General Howard is at Emmitsburg. He has talked to General Reynolds early that morning before he returned, put his troops on the road. His basic orders are to bring his troops up, position them somewhere in reserve behind or south of Gettysburg. I think in one of the accounts, he says that he was ordered to go to the Peach Orchard on the 1858 map, which would be the Peach Orchard as we know the Peach Orchard today at the Sheriffy Farm. But he rides ahead of his troops. He rides up on Cemetery Hill, and then he rides into the town, and he looks for a place to observe the battle. According to Daniel Skelly and Gus Bentley, they're on top of the Fahnestock Observatory, and they are watching smoke from the first day's battlefield drift up off of Seminary Ridge, and they look down and they see someone in a large entourage coming down Baltimore Street. General Howard's men stop and his staff in front of the courthouse. They try to gain entrance to the courthouse, and you can see the courthouse in the background of the photograph. They would like to climb up into the steeple of the courthouse, and maybe they're going to break out the louvers in the courthouse and the side of it so they can look out towards the west of the town, but they're unable to gain entrance to the door that leads up. And so while this is going on, according to Dan Skelly, he goes down to the building and goes out and alerts General Howard and his staff that they could come up to the Fahnestock Observatory. According to Gus Bentley, a staff officer for General Howard looks up and sees them on the building and yells up for, how did they get up there? And then Dan Skelly is sent down to open up the side door, and then General Howard and one or two staff officers, depending upon which account we accept, go up with them to the top of the observatory. They said, both Bentley and Skelly says that they have a map of the area, probably the 1858 wall map that, was very popular with, the Union and Confederate High Command at that time. They were, taking them off the walls of taverns and buildings. And they have a field glass, and they start surveying the field. And Howard is trying to mark down the locations of the roads leading into the town and the position of maybe that the Confederates are advancing on to Gettysburg. And of course, this is also confirmed by Elizabeth Thorne, who says at some point General Howard asked her to identify several roads in the area and where they are on the map and where they are in relationship to the town. So it seems all logical. Now, while I should mention one other thing. According to Gus Bentley's account, which is written in 1885, this event occurs between noon and 2 p.m. And he says he can't really remember what time it was. Daniel Skelly says that he looks over at the courthouse clock. And if you're ever on top of the Faunestock building, the courthouse clock is like right there in your face. And he says all he remembers is they were on that building between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. So somewhere between that hour, he remembers looking over and seeing that it was between 10 and 11. So, theoretically, General Reynolds is killed on the first day's battlefield about 10:30. So I'm going to guess, if it's near the same time frame, and everybody has a different time and a different watch anyway, but it's probably somewhere getting on 11. So somewhere just before 11, a courier comes riding down Middle Street. He must stop because of the group of couriers that General Howard has, or staff officers, in the street below the building. And he yells up to General Howard that General Reynolds has been wounded. And General Howard, according to his personal account, is like, wow, I hope he can retain possession of the field. I hope it's not too severe. And according to Daniel Skelly, the courier is George Gwynn, who was a local soldier that was in the Potomac Home Brigade Cavalry, had been stationed at Frederick, and had ridden to Gettysburg. We know he was here on June 27th and June 28th as a scout. And he apparently stayed in the area and assisted, the General Copeland's force when he came up with information, and then General Buford when he arrived and now was relaying a message for the First Corps staff. So Howard is taking this all in, and all of a sudden a second courier comes riding down Middle Street, according to Howard, and he says it's a Captain Hall from his staff. And Captain Hall yells up, General Reynolds is dead. You were in command of the field. And it's interesting, I like this difference between the account by Gus Bentley and Daniel Skelly. Daniel Skelly says that Howard was entirely composed And he says, let's see.
Is the second courier, this is Howard's courier. Right?
Yeah, the second courier was Howard's courier. And Howard had probably sent his courier to find General Reynolds with more specific orders when he reached the town. So this makes sense. Right. And this guy's returning to find General Howard and then alerts him that General Reynolds is killed. Right. According to Skelly, General Howard was perfectly calm and self-possessed, and I remember this made a lasting impression on me. Now, according to Gus Bentley, General Howard, I recollect, oh, well, first of all, the staff officers rode up and yelled, "General Reynolds is killed." General Howard, I recollect, seemed profoundly agitated. So a little bit
There's two different versions of that.
Different versions of that.
Right.
Howard is in command. Now, according to both Gus Bentley and Daniel Skelly, the first thing General Howard does, according to Bentley, is turn to his aide on the roof with him. "Captain, go immediately to General Steinwehr and tell him to stop his division on Cemetery Hill and to put his men in position for defense." Daniel Skelly, in his account, goes into great detail about how he says General Howard, and you know how much of this is supposition or he learned from post-war discussion with Howard or reading over his stuff, says that Howard had already determined that Cemetery Hill would be a good defensive position, and that at this point General Howard also, he says, orders an aide to ride to the rest of his men and order them to come up and form on Cemetery Hill. One thing I'd like to make clear is it's at the Observatory that General Howard makes the decision that Cemetery Hill will be the position that the Northern Army take possession of and fall back to, if necessary, as the first day's fight goes on. Now, Gus Bentley actually wrote his account in the National Tribune in 1885 because there had been discussion about the first day's battlefield and maybe what Howard's role was. So Gus Bentley said in his account, "I know nothing of what orders he may have had, but as he had no general command until General Reynolds' death, it is impossible that he could have been directed to fortify Cemetery Hill. And I do know that information of General's death came to him at the Observatory, and that then he gave the orders as I have described." So I think it's kind of interesting that this event occurs there at this location. Let's go to the next one.
Great.
So General Howard then leaves the coup. On his way down, there's a specific mention in both the account by Gus Bentley and the account by Daniel Skelly. And again, I believe that Daniel Skelly is reading Gus Bentley's account when he's writing his. Sometimes we don't think about the fact that they have access to these other people's accounts. He probably has a newspaper clipping from Gus Bentley. But both of them discuss how on the way down he comes upon Susan Balker Fahnestock. And again, Samuel had just died a couple years earlier. And she is really worried about the Southern Army capturing the town and there being fighting in the streets, and General Howard calms her down. Now, General Howard returned to Gettysburg several times in the post-Civil War era. And in 1902, in September of 1902, he returned for the dedication ceremony of the Henry Warner Slocum equestrian statue on Stevens Knoll. And while he was in town, he visited Dan Skelly, and along with the cameraman, William Tipton, and a few of Howard's associates, they once again climbed onto the building of the Faunestock house. By now, the observatory had been removed and an extra floor had been put on. But they took this image from the roof of the Faunestock building with the courthouse steeple in the background at the approximate location of where the observatory was that day. Now, we have been on the Fahnestock building several times at this location. One thing we should tell you right away is the view out to the west is not as good as the accounts lead you to believe. You cannot see over the crest of Seminary Ridge. So although they could definitely see the smoke of battle rising from the other side of Seminary Ridge, and you could probably tell that the heavy fighting was taking place between the Chambersburg Turnpike and the Fairfield Road. Beyond that, you were not able to see Confederate troop movements into the area, and probably couldn't see much north of the town.
Right.
So the view to see the actual troop movements is probably not as good.
And someone did ask if the observatory is still there. It is not, but the roof is accessible. In fact, the Historical Society actually owns the building. It's a very long story, and it's not a real financial benefit to the Historical Society, but we own the building, and so we're able to get up on the roof occasionally, and there is access to the roof still.
And I think, Andrew, you wanted us to mention that on July 1st, we will be posting a video of us on the roof of the Fahnestock building near the observatory, looking out to the west and describing this
and
scene.
we can get very close to where he would have been standing. We're just a little bit higher. A second story was added, I think Tim will mention in a minute.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's a very good question. And I should say, we can, that ledge is actually still very much like that on the side of the roof.
We can line up this photograph.
We could line that up perfectly.
Yes.
And I do want to point out, that is pretty bold. It looks like Howard is sitting in a chair on the ledge on the side of the...
I would not be doing that.
That's right.
You'd be lucky to get me where Daniel Skelly is.
We will not be recreating that photograph.
No. So Daniel Skelly is sitting on the ledge. That's good enough for me. Sitting on a chair. What if the rung of one of the it breaks?
And Howard is also an amputee. He's lost an arm. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier, but Howard, has one arm at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. So, I don't know about that. One arm.
Have you thought about this, Andrew? We read the account that mentioned that there were steps that went up to the observatory. But we know, because we've been up there, that after the building is renovated in 1895, you got to climb up a ladder to get onto that roof.
Right.
So he climbed up a ladder.
Right.
With his one hand.
Yeah, that's
So
pretty amazing.
So
he's also the founder of Howard University too. A lot of people don't realize that. Pretty amazing story.
Yes.
People could look into the history of Oliver Howard.
Now, another thing I want to mention is this image here is from Daniel Skelly's 1932 book.
Somebody's asking who else is in the photograph.
I don't recall off the top of my head. It's actually mentioned there in the caption, Andrew, if you can read the caption.
Right. Does it say? I don't think
have not seen an original version of this photograph. We only have it from Daniel Skelly's book. So I know that there's some Skelly descendants that live around. A couple of them live in Lancaster. So if anyone knows of where a better copy of this image is, then we'd love to see it. And it does say in the caption who the other people with General Howard are.
Right.
And can you read?
Does it?
It does say in that little description. Yeah.
I don't think
Okay. So it's hard to read.
Either of us can read that based on the scan.
One of them might be one of his sons.
Right. Wow. That's an amazing view.
But let's get to the next one. So here is the 1886 to 1888 image of the building. And again, this is, the last photograph I showed you was 1902, after an additional story had been put onto the building. So this is still the building with its somewhat Civil War appearance, with an addition placed onto the back of it, a lower addition. And what I like about this photograph is in 1892, I believe it was, Daniel Skelly and an associate, Ferdinand Warner, took over the Faunestock store business, and they ran a dry goods store at that location until, I believe, 1911. So in this photograph, Daniel Skelly is one of the people in front of the building. I just want to point out that the Mumpers rent a furniture store and also a photographic gallery in this building at the time of this image. And if you look on the left side of the building, on the Middle Street side, you can see the large glass window to emit light to the photographic studio. And on the roof, on the front, the Baltimore Street side, you can see they cut a hole in the roof and put a large glass panel on it also to emit light to the photographic studio. Let's go to the blow up. And here, undoubtedly, that's Dan Skelly in the doorway. And I don't know what Ferdinand Warner looks like, but also Basil Biggs is in this photograph off to the right, the veterinarian of Gettysburg who purchased the Tawnytown Road farm after the battle and lived at the Crawford farm at the time. So it's a really nice image of him.
Right.
Let's go to the next one. We actually, in our collection here, have the original version of this, which appears to be recorded within a few months of the other image. And a lot of the same features are in the photograph. So again, 1886 to 1888. This one also has some of the buildings on Middle Street down there that we can see that are, no longer standing. Now, by the 1970s, the building was in a horrible state of disrepair. It was going to be demolished, and a hardware store, a modern hardware store, was going to be built at the spot. But there was immense outrage in our community over the fact that this historic structure that was part of the community for so many years would be destroyed. And the local town fathers got together. They convinced people not to destroy the building. And in 1975, it was deeded over to the Adams County Historical Society. In 1986, it was renovated, and a long-term lease was signed by the Historical Society to the interfaith housing of Adams County, interfaith housing.
The ownership's changed a little bit over time, but it is the local housing authority, Adams County Housing Authority.
In 2013, they greatly renovated the building and vastly improved the interior. And I think anyone who has been in it recently would be greatly impressed by the renovations of the building. But what I find interesting is when you go there today and you look at the Middle Street side of the building, or even the other side of the building for that matter, that facing the square, let's go to the next one, you can still see in the bricks where the original building was and the tracing of the original building in the bricks. In 1895 is when the building was enlarged to its more present appearance.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's a fascinating structure, and we're lucky that we have the ability to go up there and look at it. I think today, like Tim said, it is a very impressive view. It's not quite what you might expect. You can't see all the way to the first day's fighting on McPherson's Ridge and beyond that to Hers Ridge, but you can see the seminary beautifully. You can see the Gettysburg College campus, then Pennsylvania College. You can see all the way out to the Peace Light and Oak Ridge. You can see the observation tower out there. And then if you look, in other directions, it kind of gives you an idea of the landscape. You can look out the York Pike or the York Road, which is now Route 30 East, and you can see the rise of ground where Camp Letterman Hospital was established following the battle. And then you can see things on East Cemetery Hill, like the Water Tower, if you look up towards further south toward the southern part of the town in Baltimore Street. So it's an amazing location with a great history. And Tim, I should point out, put together this program in the last couple hours. So just a testament to his knowledge of Gettysburg and of the buildings in the town and their wonderful stories. So thank you for joining us tonight. I think I want to thank a few people who've donated already. If you have a chance to hit the donate button, if you enjoyed the program tonight, it would really help us, especially with our big project to build a new and proper home for the Historical Society. We're so excited to get all these artifacts out of their improper conditions into a beautiful new building where we can share them with all of you and open up our doors so that you can come and see programs and visit our exhibits and also do your own research on the community and Gettysburg's wonderful story. So thanks for for joining us again this evening. We're going to be doing a lot of programs, as Tim mentioned, over the anniversary. So from June 26th to July 3rd, we're going to have lots of videos appearing. If you're on our email list, you'll get the updates about that with a schedule at some point in the next week or two. If not, you can go to our website and sign up for our newsletter. But thanks again for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Dobbin House, our sponsor, as well. And we'll continue to do these programs as much as we can. So thanks for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you all next time. Good night.